Hello and welcome, Mr. Arindom Datta. This is Prateep Basu, everyone, founder and CEO of SatSure, and we have with us Mr. Arindom Datta, who is an expert in the banking space globally. Today, we'll be doing a question and answer session with Mr. Datta regarding the use of satellite imagery and analytics for improving the financial inclusion of smallholder farmers.
Thanks, Prateep. From the 30 years of experience of agriculture financing, especially, reaching out to smallholder farmers in the emerging markets, the biggest bane that we have seen is the transaction cost. That when you are trying to originate, smallholder farmers was spread across deep rural areas, the cost of servicing the farmers and to do the credit underwriting is very, very high. And second is the cost of monitoring, which leads to portfolio quality issues. That's been the biggest pain, that how do we get real-time information of the farmers, what they are growing, and what the situation of the crop is, where they are going to sell the crops, and what the expected realization of the crops are. That's the farmer's ability to pay to be good farmers, good businessmen. And so, Prateep, in this context, I would like to understand from you that what are the kind of technology and remote sensing and machine learning solutions that SatSure has to be able to work with the banking and financial services sector to enhance the flow of credit to farmers, especially smallholder farmers?
That's a great question, Arindam. Let me give a quick background of the technology itself. So, remote sensing has been there for more than 3 decades, and mostly public sector and research organizations have used it for planning purposes, mapping crops, etc., in agriculture sector. See, one of the key advantages it provides from servicing the finance sector is that via remote sensing, you can have data collection and data analysis at scale. And the scale at which farming happens, it's impossible to beat remote sensing that way. But the most important part is the translation of this data into information that is very consumable. Now, from a financing point of view, as you mentioned previously, transaction cost and the risk cost. These are two very important things to understand that in the agriculture context, these risks are today a lot more induced due to the frequency of climatic events, the impact of such climate events on the production and on the farmer's income. So being able to assess that was the key thing that banks wanted as part of their risk management thing, as well as being able to reach farmers with minimum number of physical branches and able to do their appraisal or evaluation in a digital mode was another part of reducing that transaction cost, not just the risk cost. So remote sensing data helps in doing both of them. But again, data is just data. The machine learning component comes when you have to actually translate that data into information. For example, what crop is grown, the history of crop in a parcel of land, the history of its production, and just using remote sensing, you cannot predict production or you cannot predict irrigation. You will have to have feedback data, ground collected data. So it's a very interwoven process where both the eyes in the sky and the boots on the ground comes together, is analyzed using machine learning, and then it translates into palatable and digestible information for the banks to take their credit decisions, as well as to monitor their portfolio across with a very minimal cost of servicing.
Technology, especially remote sensing solutions, would help the banks to do better underwriting and to be able to monitor large portfolios much more efficiently than what they are doing. Now, because of the solutions and the climate challenge that you mentioned, so I would guess that your solutions would be also very, very useful and helpful for the real sector food and agri players, whether they're input players, whether they are procurement agencies, whether they are large processors, because they also work with smallholder farmers, and ultimately how the crop is grown and how efficiently information is transmitted along the value chain is very, very important for business decision. Can you tell us a little bit about how SatSure can help work with the larger ecosystem of agriculture and food players?
We are already doing that. Indeed, the ecosystem is very integrated. So if you are able to, let's say, provide banks with information such as what I mentioned earlier, the same information can be aggregated, at a village level, at a sub district or district level, and then it creates a lot more density of information for other players in the ecosystem, not just the cropping patterns, but also the timing signals, like when the sowing is happening, where the sowing is happening, where the harvesting is happening, or when you predict how much harvest is going to come and where, in which weeks it's going to happen. So stuff like that becomes intelligence for procurement, intelligence for placement of your inventory. When you embed more and more farm level data into it, then it can also become an advisory intelligence to farmers. So overall, the movement of such kind of data sets, whether it's satellite remote sensing or weather data, combined with the all kinds of auxiliary data and analysis of it using data science, machine learning, etc., creates value across the entire ecosystem, which essentially gives a better decision making quality for everyone, from farmers to the people who are selling to farmers, to people who are financing or insurance to farmers, and at a policy level as well.
And Prateep, we also briefly touch upon climate. Now, that's becoming a very big story, a difficult story, especially in the agriculture sector when, food security is becoming so important. We'll have a population of approximately 10 billion by 2050. Globally, about 40% of the population is dependent directly on agriculture for their livelihoods. Now, from a climate solution perspective, especially on the adaptation and resilience side, would you have some solutions, or would you be building up solutions for the food and agri large corporates or for the banking sector?
For us, the way we operate is that we innovate sectorially. So our first set of innovations happened with the banking and insurance sector. Today, we are working on data products, but attuned to the kind of requirements of, let's say, a seed company, a chemical company, an FMCG company. So most of their demand is coming from the fact that the climate resiliency in their business process is minimal. So use this kind of data and information that they consume from us helps them to build the resiliency to adapt in terms of, let's say, lowered production or delayed sowing or changing harvest and sowing times because of the change in monsoons, etc. So hence the intelligence that we are building, it can packaged as per the context of the user and the industry, it can be very much used for adaptation to the vagaries of climatic variables and climate change.
Very, very useful and wonderful to hear that, Prateep. And last question, a very generic question. Now, you guys come in with a lot of expertise on, on deep learning, on data, on remote sensing, on AI, machine learning, etc. Now, for the larger ecosystem players, including let's say the large farmer base, the SMEs, the processors, the agriculture companies, they do not understand all this technology. Now, how do you make it understandable and easy for adoption for all these different stakeholders so that they don't see the science behind it, but they see the utility of the information that you're providing as a direct input for them to take better businesses?
I think there is a lot of work to be done on this front. When I say work, it is a combination of the product design itself. It starts from the availability of data, the kind of spectral bands required to, let's say, collect information, not just on the crop health and all, but also soil quality, moisture. So there are multiple different intelligence at a farm level that can be generated to improve upon irrigation and farming practices, etc. But I would say the more important part from an adoption perspective is the way user applications are designed. It has to actually be understood and very easy to use by farmers, whether they are big farmers or small farmers. I think distribution can always be figured out, but the adoption is always based on how again easily understandable and actionable you make it to the person. So there will be a lot of integration of associated technologies like I already saw some folks working on something called Kisan GPT. So how you bring in natural language based advisories, how you create advisories in vernacular language, how you make this information not like move from the current pixel to pixel to finally numbers and actions. So I think that's the journey for the geospatial sector, especially in the context of BFSI and Agri and climate change.
Thanks, Prateep. Looks very exciting, and I wish you all the best in your endeavors.
Thank you, Arindam. Indeed, for our viewers, I would also like to take this opportunity to ask a couple of questions to you, given your experience in this domain.
Yeah.
What, in your opinion, would be the key bottlenecks from banks and regulators' point of view to adopt such kind of Earth observation and other geospatial data as a legitimate source of evidence for credit risk assessment of farm loans or for the larger agri sector to actually use it for decision making at scale?
Right, Pratibha. Very interesting and a very important question. Now, we need to understand that the banking sector, licensed banks, are the most regulated business sector in the world, and they need to be regulated. And it's a job of the central bank to protect the interest of the depositors and to ensure that we have very stable financial systems. And the underwriting standards of the banks are as per the standards which the central bank wishes for. There will always be issues when financial institutions, especially the banks, they adopt third-party technology solutions. One is integrating their systems with the external parties from a data security perspective, from a data sharing perspective, from a data privacy perspective, etc., etc. So banks and the regulators would be very, very wary. So the way I look at it is, and there are all kind of banks. There are very traditional banks who have just not adopted any technology. There are banks which wish to adopt technology. But I think the good part here is that all the banks who do large scale retail business, and I'm speaking about the agriculture and rural sector here, they realize that what we spoke of earlier, the transaction cost and the risk, the portfolio risk that they carry, they need technology to be able to address this issue. So that realization is there, but they may not have the knowledge of how to access technology which is safe to use, which is useful for them. So the process is to work with them, build up the pilots, keep informing the central banks about what they are doing, and if possible, get the blessings of the central bank. On the other side, it is also advisable that technology players like you get together or you individually, you reach out to the regulators and you keep educating them and informing them of the solutions you have, possibly coax the central banks to work on a sandbox approach where you can work with a few financial institutions to work on some solutions uh, under a very watertight situation, so that the central bank realizes that the technology is safe and it's good for the banking sector. It brings in efficiency. It leads to climate financing, inclusive financing. So you will have to do a lot of work of working with different kind of financial institutions and different regulators across the world.
That's very interesting. Thank you, Arindam. Indeed, there have been quite a few international banks of repute like Rabobank and even multilaterals like IFC who have backed such kind of innovative technology for enhancing smallholder financing across the world. So, can you share what has been the experience of such organizations with geospatial technology in BFSI?
Pradeep, the way I look at it is, agriculture financing, that's farmer financing, especially smallholder farmers, is mostly the domain of local financial institutions, whether they are non-banks, whether they are large domestic retail financing institutions, or they are microfinance institutions. The large global banks do not usually get into farmer financing because it's regulatory very, very complex. And second is the farmers, they need the capital in local currency, which most of the international banks will not be able to provide. Now, having said that, it's the mission of some of the large global banks and the DFIs of the world to ensure that flow of credit goes to the agriculture sector, again, from a food security, from a climate perspective, from an inclusive perspective, and from an income perspective. So what they do usually is they work with local financial institutions, they make investments into them, they provide them with debt products, and they also provide a lot of expertise to these retail operators on the ground who do agriculture financing, and they get in global expertise. And that's the role of these large organizations, to be able to identify the right kind of technology, remote sensing solutions, satellite imagery solutions, test them, and then bring them to a cohort of financial institutions with whom they are working. And that can be done at a global scale. So these institutions are very, very useful for partnerships. And that's the kind of partnership we should seek, because they'll be able to diffuse it far easier to their partner financial institutions across the world, especially in the emerging markets.
That's great advice. Thank you, Arindam. Indeed, at SatSure, we have been engaged with some of these, pilots, and definitely, it seems like what we are building here in India is definitely relevant. Also, in many of the developing countries, which face a similar kind of problems in agriculture and agriculture financing. So, on a parting note, before we close, would like to ask one last question, which is, what would be your advice to the geospatial sector in general, while building tools and products for the BFSI sector?
Prateep, a very interesting question. And I'm saying it's interesting because you guys have so much of expertise and experience of using technology, whether it's remote sensing, AI, ML, and all these other kind of new age, cutting edge technology. Most of the ecosystem players, the real sector, food and agri players, the financial institutions, the local MFIs, they do not have expertise in all these technology. So, and you guys also, your technology solution providers, you don't do the financing, you don't participate in the agri supply chain activities directly. So it's very, very important that you don't come up with a one size fits all kind of solution, but you work with these players to build up bespoke solutions, which is required in certain markets because of agroclimatic reasons, because of the kind of soil and water availability and other factors, both cultural soft factors and also the environment factors, which are relevant for your solution to enhance businesses in different geographies. So what I would suggest is, what SDG 17 talks of, that's collaboration and partnership. That's the way to go, because agriculture is such a complicated sector. The challenges of agriculture are so complicated. You need partnership to be able to bring out the right, appropriate, cost efficient technologies to work with the players in the supply chain. So my advice would be, build a partnership, work out solutions, see what works, scale it up, replicate it, and build up multiple solutions which are required for different crops, different agroclimatic regions, and different kind of cultural contexts in which it could work. So work with them and build up solutions together. That's the important message I would like to convey.
Thank you so much for that message. Indeed, partnerships are the way to move forward for sure, and it's a big ecosystem. So it's a tough one, and the impact is huge. It's not limited to India. India itself is big, but the impact could be global here. So definitely, I think these are very very wise words of advice, Arindam. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us and for your time. With this, I would like to just summarize for our viewers some of the key highlights of this discussion from my point of view, which were the use of geospatial data for improving cost efficiencies of doing business in agriculture, especially when it's large scale business in agriculture, such as banking. Improving the risk perception of especially the climate risk part and the impact of it on the credit risk when you're financing farmers, And last but not the least, the importance of the geospatial sector, or rather the role it can play in really enabling or unlocking finance for the agri sector. So those would be my three key highlights. And now again, on behalf of SatSure team, I would like to thank you, and hope we look forward to also having you in Rotterdam at GWF in May.
Thank you, Prateep, and I wish you all the best. And we look forward to the event in Rotterdam next month. And we look forward to hearing from experts like you and other players, other global players, about the solutions they are providing to solve some of the real problems of the world. Thank you so much, Prateep.
Thank you.